Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Ecurious Minds. A very warm welcome to our Meet the Expert, Carol. Carol, this is what our community looks like. Ecurious Mind, where we believe in be the change to bring the change. It started from a group 5 years back. We're going to turn 5 on 9th of April. That's when we started the community in 2020. As everybody grows, so did our community. So we have these verticals in our communities, I can say. We look at the book read club, where we read your books. We invited you in 2021. We look at recruitment of everybody. It is knowledge is power program, where we do all our professional development. Then we have Meet the Expert, where very able people like you, the veterans, come to the community to educate us. And as a community whole, we look at very active collaboration, enabling each one of us with a lot of capability of what we have in us. So we bring it on the platform. So this is what the community is. You can reach out to us on various social media handles. And
Black is nothing bad. I mean, it's not going to spoil anything.
can we please put ourselves on mute? Thank you. And yes, here is Carol with us. Today, it's an absolute honor to welcome back someone who has profoundly inspired educators across the globe, Carol Ann Tomilson, the goddess of differentiation, as I call her. Dr. Tomilson, your work has transformed classrooms into spaces where every child feels seen, valued, and challenged. You have reminded us that teaching is not just about content, but also about connecting with the unique potential of every learner. Having you with us again after 2021 feels like a long awaited reunion of hearts and mind. Your insights resonate deeply with our mission at Ecurious Minds: be the change to bring the change. As a community that thrives on collaboration, reflective, and growth, we are grateful to have the opportunity to learn from you once more. So, on behalf of all of us, I welcome you, Carol, to Ecurious Minds. Thank you, Carol. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. It's an honor to be here with you. I think what you do as a group is really special. And the fact that you are maintaining that and making it grow, it was certainly a wonderful thing during the pandemic when people felt isolated. But I think that isolation happens in teaching too much. So the fact that you keep going and working together is a kind of a rare thing and really a wonderful one, I think. So Pallavi asked me to talk with you tonight some about differentiation. And so I'm going to try to do that in a contained period of time. I'm not very good at short. So I'm going to go as well as I can for as long as we have, and then I'll stop. I welcome you, appreciate your willingness to be here at the end of a day when you probably already worked too hard and are feeling fairly exhausted and may not have had a chance to eat anything yet. So thank you for being the kind of educator that takes opportunities and eager to continue to grow. We have a brief session, and so my goals are fairly brief as well. What I really want to do is to help you expand your thinking about differentiation. I'm not going to try tonight to tell you things that you may already know from reading and talking together. I want to try to push you a little bit in your thinking so that you continue to grow in that area too, which of course I think is really important. It has great benefit to you as a professional and also a great benefit to your students if you continue to develop your understanding in your practice toward the goals that Pallavi mentioned very well, that beautifully said. I'd like to have that on tape myself. So I want to help you expand your thinking and illustrate with some classroom examples a few ways that the ideas that I'm talking about might look in practice. I think it's always important to say there's no recipe for differentiation. You can see things that you can pick up and say, yes, I can use this. No, I can't. I can do this if I change it this way. That's great. But I want to show you some ways that some teachers have used some of the ideas that we'll look at. And I'm going to try to answer a few of your questions as the session ends. So here we go. The session has two parts. We talk about differentiation as a profession worldwide really often. And I find that when we do it, we talk about it in a narrowed, constricted way. So we say we do this thing, we already differentiate. And I'm not sure that all of us understand what the it is as thoroughly as we might. So I want to talk with you for a little bit about what differentiation is not, because I hear those things so many times. What it is, share with you a couple of definitions that I work from, and then do a lot of give you another way to think about differentiation and illustrate that. So here we go. To me, differentiation is not these things. It is not streaming so that you put kids that you think are smart in one place and kids that you think are okay in another, and kids that you think are hopeless maybe, or at least in deep trouble in another. That's antithetical to building a community of learners to me. As soon as we start doing things that indicate that teachers believe these kids have great promise and these kids don't have very much, we have put the damper on what a lot of kids can do and on the way we teach as well. So, and people do say to me, we differentiate in our school because we have high stream, middle stream, low stream, high tracks, whatever. Differentiation also to me is not saying, okay, well, I see I'm going to have students from all sorts of starting points, languages, cultures, talent, interests, needs in my class. But that's okay because I can track them within my class. And I can have groups of kids that are smart and they can work together, and kids that are kind of average and they can work together, and kids that are not looking too good and they can work together. Once again, the students see that and they understand which group they're in, and it modifies how they feel about themselves in a negative way and also how they feel about each other in a negative way. You'll see this as larger type. Differentiation to me is not an add-on to teaching. Oh, I get it. I do these things in my class and I feel pretty smooth with those, but I need to add this thing called differentiation. The model of differentiation that I have watched grow for 55 years now is really about helping us change the big picture of our teaching, change our thinking about the whole scope of what we do so that we're stronger and more effective with it. Differentiation is not mostly for kids with identified learning needs. It's not mostly for students identified as advanced or gifted. I have never known in the years that I have understood and practiced this philosophy any student in a class that I have taught in preschool, high school, middle school, or at the university. I have never known a class that I taught where there was any student that didn't need me in some special way. I could spend the whole time with you on that, but differentiation is for every kid in your class. It should never be assigning extra work to kids who are advanced. It should never be what we say in the US sometimes is dumbing down the curriculum instead of, diluting it for kids that have some kind of learning challenges. Large type again. It should never be thought of as a lesson plan for every learner. We couldn't even do that if we had the time. We don't know how to make something different for every student. It would eat up our lives, but it would be pointless anyhow. And it is not a particular set of instructional strategies. Have to have some instructional strategies, of course, but we tend to think of those as different worksheets for different kids. And there's so many different things that we can do that are more powerful than that. If we had a nice little set of instructional strategies and we didn't really understand the philosophy or the principles of differentiation, the chances are pretty good that those instructional strategies would not have as much power as if we did have a fuller understanding of differentiation. And differentiation is not incompatible with standards, goals, learning intentions, whatever we call those things in different places. The goal of differentiation is to help kids learn the most important things that they need to learn, and that can include standards or learning intentions, as efficiently and effectively as possible. So what is differentiation then, or what should it be if we thought about it fully?
Carol, I think most of us are thinking what you said differentiation is not. was actually in our mind. And most of us have been practicing this. Can I see a hand raise if you are, if any of these things that Carol has? Yes. Can we see the virtual hand, please? Many of us, see, so many. We actually have been, as practitioners, what you're saying, differentiation is not. We've been doing it as so many of us.
You mean doing them as these things that
Yes,
shouldn't be?
yes,
Yes,
yes.
yes. Um, I'm going to shoot myself in the foot in terms of time now, but I was doing a webinar yesterday as part of a fourth session webinar, and I want to read you a question that a person in the class, this was the second session we had, posted for me. She said, most teachers feel exhausted with a classroom of varied needs, and hence consistency seems to be the most challenging task for us. How can we help teachers with this? That was her first question. Didn't even need to read that one to you. The second one, in our classroom, students often work at various levels, with some following modified curriculum that requires entirely different planning. At school, is it truly fair to the student and the teacher? I'm sorry, I should have gotten to question 3. I had all this in front of me. It's the third one that I want for you. So this one, I'll read all of to you. When you mention differentiation isn't just about creating worksheets or planning a few varied activities in the classroom, what exactly did you mean? From what I've witnessed in most cases, differentiation is often implemented in a robotic manner where
Hmm.
tasks are divided into categories such as high achievers, mid achievers, and low achievers.
Absolutely. We also have
Could
this
you,
question.
yeah. So she said, could you shed some light on this approach? It seems that the primary focus often shifts toward achieving overall better class results on a standardized test for the school rather than truly addressing the individual needs of students. This shift can lead to frustration among teachers who may feel their efforts aren't reflected in improved performance metrics. In such cases, students such as English language learners and students who struggle are often seen as barriers to raising the scores rather than as individuals with unique needs and potentials. How can we truly refocus differentiation to support diverse learners and ensure that teachers feel empowered rather than overwhelmed? That's sort of what you were saying, wasn't it?
I think we resonate. A lot of our community members have asked almost the same questions.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're going to try tonight to do a little bit with that in a short time. So, what is differentiation if it's not those things? Or what could it be? What should it be? I think it first is coming to understand the reality that kids are human beings, and human beings are individual beings, and that we learn individually. The truth is, it is impossible to teach the class. The class does not exist in any way that makes sense. You can teach the class today, but you can guarantee that some students had almost no idea what you were talking about. Some were bored to death because they've known this for 3 years. Some can't pay attention very well, and you were talking to them a really lot, and so they're off somewhere else looking at things. We can't teach a class as though it were one student because it's not. That means that we have to plan with the student in mind rather than only the students. We talk about the students. The students like it when we do this. The students were squirrely yesterday. The students did a poor job on that test last week. No such thing as this thing called the students. Some of the students hate it when we do that thing. Some of the students did brilliantly on that test last week. Some of the students aren't squirrely when the others are. Differentiation asks us to be attentive to a student's academic development, but also their intellectual development, their affective development, and their social development. And that seems like a lot, but every one of us is all of those things. And if we think our job is only to raise test scores or to cover material, we're creating classrooms where the social and affective and intellectual development is largely neglected. It's learner-centered, which means that it's the kind of philosophy that says, okay, wait a minute here, I'm feeling stressed. feeling like I'm going to scream in a minute. Let me pull back and say, what do these kids need now? What's going to serve them best? What's something that can serve many or most of the students well? Where's some places that I'm going to have some kind of different thinking about particular students, at least for right now with this thing we're looking at. Not about covering something. It's not about a test score. It's about preparing kids as whole people for life. It's respectful teaching, meaning that we try as hard as we can, and we never are perfect, but as hard as we can to have facial expressions and tones of voice and patience and humor and all the things that we use with people that we care about so that we show respect to all of our students. And by the way, respectful teaching also means doing things that enliven learning for kids, not cover more faster. It's responsive teaching, responding to the strengths and the needs and the interests and the physical differences and all the other things with kids, not just sitting there and saying, I know this student's really smart, but I'm sorry, I have to keep going slowly because I have 5 other kids that need that pace. Differentiation is often subtle. It's in the background. Had a teacher in France several years ago before the pandemic actually, who said to me in a session one day, kind of with an edge in his voice, does differentiation always have to be in your face? And I said, tell me what you mean by that. And he said, well, my principal says when she comes in the classroom, if she's there as much as 15 minutes, she expects to see me differentiate at least 3 times. And he said, much of what I do isn't visible to anybody. And I think it should be that way. But it's powerful stuff that makes a difference to kids. And I think he's right. David Sousa, who writes about the brain and learning, told me once that he thinks of differentiation, and this is really powerful, as our trying to see the classroom through the eyes of a student. How's this kid responding now? What evidence do I have that this student is ready for the things that we're doing, or that this student, how can I connect this stuff with this student's interests in life? Research, differentiation, as I have come to know it over a very long period of time, should always be based on our current best understanding of research from psychology, pedagogy, and neuroscience, and sometimes from sociology and anthropology as well. Research changes over time, and the model should grow and evolve as our knowledge changes, just exactly like the practice of medicine does, but it should be research-based. To me, the most powerful way to think about differentiation is as a way of being in a classroom. How we work together flexibly, how we honor one another, how I model things that I wish the kids could learn and model and learn and apply themselves. And I teach them the skills that they don't have. If they don't know how to work together effectively, we can learn that. If they don't know how to get up and move around a room efficiently, we can figure that out. We can do that. If I have students who don't know how to study, if nobody teaches them, they'll never know how to study. So those are things, all of those things. What do I want this place to be for all of us? What's the best we can hope for, and what's the best we can do here? And I think this is really important to say, and your organization sort of reflects this ongoing need of teachers. You don't come to a one-night session and suddenly you know differentiation or anything else. You don't even read some books and talk about them, which is a step way further forward than most people go. And you're not finished still yet, even there. It's like trying to learn to be a good parent. Really want to be a good parent when you bring that baby home from the hospital. But if that kid is 10, you've been working at it 10 years and you still don't have it. You're better, but still don't have it. When that kid is an adolescent, you suddenly feel like you don't know anything anymore. The kid goes away to school or to a first job, you think, okay, on his own. But that doesn't stop you from trying to figure out how to be a good parent at that stage in life. Differentiation is the same way. It's complex. It's a way of life. And trying to go back and be sure you understand the it and go from there is really important. So I'm
Uh,
going to
so
share with you two definitions of differentiation.
Carol, sorry to interrupt you in between. Your
I'm sorry.
so if we go back to your previous slide, what you're explaining, it's but in our school context, in our classroom context, when we, as you mentioned that one of the teachers said that, which is true. We've been asked to do show differentiation, that every notebook should look different. The outcome of every child should be different, instruction to be different for every child. So the process, the environment, the product, the three types of learners in the class. Yes, so this is what we are expected to do in the class and to make our lesson plans based on this.
Well, so maybe I'm gonna respond to your question
Hmm.
now, and I'll try to keep building in a response as we go through the rest of the session together. Um, the intent of what you're saying, I think, is fine. I would like for a teacher to be thinking about how is this piece of the lesson going to work, and how about this for these students. But in the first place, what's happening there is thinking about differentiation only as a piece of classwork. And,
Hmm.
and what I really want to show you tonight is a way to stretch that thinking. Um, and I can't even imagine that I would want to try to have a different product or way to show what you've learned for every kid. What I want to do, and I'm thinking now, let's say about a summative assessment, whether it's a, a product that student, a performance that students are going to do, or a piece of paper they're going to complete. I want to have something that I think is a really interesting and thoughtful
You do not have the pins
way
for
to
it.
measure what kids know.
That is that.
And then I want to ask myself, how can I modify this for kids? I might say, again, if it's going to be a performance assessment, here are two ideas that I have that you might decide to use to show us what you've learned. If you have another idea, let's talk about it. You have to show us the same goals, your essential knowledge, understanding, and skill. You're all going to try to show us that. But it's fine with me if you do it this way instead of that way. In other words, you can differentiate assessments. It's also fine to say, I have some students here for whom the language of the classroom is not their home language, not their first language. And it doesn't make any sense for me to tell them that they have to complete this thing in the same length of time in a language they can hardly understand. I can let them do the first draft in their language, and then we can get it translated. Or
Hmm.
I can give them additional time. That's not being unfair to somebody else. If there's somebody else that doesn't have the language to do this, I'll do the same thing for them. I can write a quiz or a test in simpler language for some students, or I've had some students where it would be better to give them the first question first and then the second question and then the third one because they panic if they see all three together.
Hmm.
There are lots of ways I can modify things without saying I'm expected to have a different test for everybody or a different product for everybody. So let's keep going for a little bit and let me see if I can show you with some of these things
Thank you, Carol.
ways to work with it. But then I would say to this group especially, you many of you are leaders among teachers, and you are leaders in your own building. And it is possible to say, in our group, we've been thinking about this, and we had somebody come and talk to us that raised this issue. And we've been thinking about this in our classroom, and we're wondering if we could have a conversation about this in a
Hmm.
way that helps us modify the way we're talking about differentiation, because it opens up a world of possibilities for teachers.
True. I wish the schools are that open-minded, Carol, to bring the actual humane in our teaching and learning.
Yeah, yeah.
We say that
So,
the child is in the center, but the child is actually missing.
yeah, yeah.
That's the sad part.
Yeah, it is. All of this is hard, but the truth is, when you get it right, it makes you better and it makes your students better. And it's okay to keep changing and growing as your understanding grows. It's better than digging in on something and saying, this is what we're going to do forever, even though it's driving us crazy.
True, true, Carol.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a simple definition and then a more complex one. And then I'm actually going to skip some stuff here. But before I even give you this simple definition, actually, let me just do this. If you have some folks that are new working with differentiation, and sort of like a where can I start? Truth is, you can start anywhere. And it's good to start where you think it's a smart place to start, probably, because I don't know your students. But a decent way to start off is to say, differentiation is shaking up a traditional classroom so that there are more ways for kids to take in information than there used to be. Meaning that when I present something to students, maybe I'm not going to just talk to them as I usually would have. Maybe I'm going to show them more pictures or some moving diagrams of something. Maybe I'm going to have some students stand up and act out this scientific process, what happens during photosynthesis, what's going on then. Maybe I'm going to connect the process of photosynthesis with something that a poet wrote that talks about that notion of things nourishing one another and you know, the light that comes into our lives and that kind of thing. And here's what it means in science. Maybe I'm going to have a student who can listen to a text rather than having to read the whole text because it just can't work right now. Maybe with older students, I'm going to find some podcasts in science or history that really bring to life this topic we're talking about and invite students to listen to that podcast because you can listen to something at a far more advanced level than you can sometimes read that thing. And maybe what I'm going to do is just chat with the kids for a while and then have them do a think, pair, share to see what they think we're talking about. And then I'm going to suggest to them what I think we were talking about and see if we have a problem there. There are so many different ways kids can take in information, and sometimes we just stand up and do what we do. We can also give kids different ways to make sense out of what they're learning. With some students, it would work just fine to say, write me a paragraph that tells me exactly what you would say to a second grader to help that second grader understand this thing that we're talking about. What would you say to make that clear and accurate to a second grader? And with other students, what I might say is ways to make sense of it is, here's a graphic organizer. It tells you parts and wholes and asks you to be real clear on what those parts and wholes are. I'm not suggesting doing 25 of those, different ones of those, but just saying, can I, instead of one way to help kids figure this out, could I come up with 2 ways, 3 ways to help them make sense of it? Maybe one way is in a small group discussion. And then I can also give them some choices about how to express what they've learned. If I do these things, I'm going to figure out some other stuff. I'm going to be more attuned to kids. I'm going to be watching them better. I'm going to be listening to them better. I'm going to be gathering data better. I'm going to be able to say in a while, you know what, guys, last time I gave you some choices, 2 students chose to do things that really surprised me. And they really were perfect for these 2 kids to show us what they had learned. And I want to ask these 2 kids to share with you what they did so that we can all start building more ideas about how we can show what we've learned. All of those things to me are differentiation. Here's my more complex definition, and it actually probably sounds simpler. And at my point in life, it is simpler, but it actually isn't sort of until you get there. Differentiation is creating conditions in a classroom that are most likely to encourage the academic, affective, and social growth of each learner. Creating conditions in a classroom. One condition in a classroom might be that there are certain times in the day when if a student really feels like he or she needs to get up and move around, they can do that without feeling like they're going to be in trouble. They know where they can move in the room. They know that their job is to do that so that they can get the kinks out but not bother anybody else. Maybe a condition in a classroom is that you're very careful when kids come in to make some sort of contact with them. One of the most important things I ever did, and I'm going to slow down to tell you a story here, and then we won't have any time left, but I had very large classes my first, well, almost always, not probably large maybe by Indian standards, but large for the US. Often had 40 kids in a class that wasn't designed to seat 40. And of course, the kids came and went every 45 minutes. And I think a lot of the time before that as a teacher, when they were coming and going from the room, I was trying to get stuff ready for them. But I started standing at the door, just religiously standing at that door every day when they came in and when they left. And what that meant was for just a second, I was able to say something eyeball to eyeball with one kid. I could tell them I liked the new shoes they had on. I could tell them I was proud of them for taking a chance when they did this thing yesterday. I could ask them if they'd been watching anything on television that I should be watching. It didn't matter. It was just one comment. And I did that in this particular school for about 20 years.
Wow.
And at the end of that time, I was I was going to go to the university at the end of that year. And that was not a choice that I would have made, actually. We had some leadership in that district that was feeling inappropriate to many of us as teachers. And the question really for a number of us was, do we want to be a part of this? Is this something that we can really support? And so a whole bunch of people ended up doing other things at the end of that year. I had not told my students that I was going to leave because we had several things in the spring planned and I didn't want to ruin that for them. So I didn't tell them till close to the end of the year, and they could tell that it was hard for me to talk about it. And I never did feel like it was a good idea to stand in front of seventh graders and cry. That sort of doesn't do the right thing. So anyhow, we had not been as comfortable with each other as we normally would have been. And so I'll leave that right there. And this one particular morning, maybe 5 or 6 days before school was over, we had a parent conference in the principal's office. I don't know if you all do this, but principal or a teacher had needed to see a couple of parents, a set of parents about a problem a child was having. And they asked all the teachers to come meet with those parents and talk about how they're seeing or experiencing that and what we can all do together to make it better. So that's fine, except of course the bell rings and I'm way far away from my room and the conference just kept going. And I also, even if you trust your kids, it's a little dicey to think you got a whole room full of 12-year-olds up there unattended to. These were actually eighth graders. But so when the conference was over, I went flying down this long hall and around the corner and got ready to go up to the stairs to where my room was. And the bell had rung several minutes ago. And I kept thinking, oh, I hope they're not doing anything awful in there. And all of a sudden I realized there were kids in the hall. And I thought, well, what are those kids doing in the hall? Half of them were lined up down this wall and the other half were lined up down this wall. So they were like a row of bushes on each side of a street. And then I realized those were my students standing there like that in that hall. And then I'm thinking, what are they doing? And I knew not to look at them like they were doing something awful until I understood what they were doing. So I was just kind of squinting, looking from one side to the other, trying to figure it out. And as I walked down that hall, each student, as I passed them, said something to me that I had said to them as they came into the room one day or left that room.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it wasn't a well moment. Probably it was, I couldn't even say anything to them about that at that point. When I got back into the room, because I would have been a big wet pile of tears on the floor.
I know.
But what that said really to them was what they were saying to me was, we understand this is a hard time for you. And this is a way you helped us. And so we want to do that for you. That is really powerful. That is a kind of differentiation. That's what I mean by a way of life in a classroom. And that is much more powerful than somebody telling you you have to have a different lesson for every kid, because you can't do that and make any sense of it. You're spending your life doing all kind of stuff that isn't as powerful. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to skip a whole bunch of stuff here with you, because otherwise we're going to have nothing left. And I want to see if I can keep my word that I'm going to show you a way to think about differentiation with a broader.
Don't worry about the time, Carol. You have
I'm
all our
sorry.
ears.
Well, I have to worry about the time. We can't stay till here at 10 o'clock your time tonight. So I'm gonna skip to something here, except I'm gonna do one other thing here. If I had finished the session that was here, I would have said to you that one of the things I have learned over time is that differentiation is about making everything that happens in the classroom better. We have 5 classroom elements. All of us have them, whether we name them or not. All of us have a learning environment. All of us have curriculum. All of us have assessment practices. All of us have instruction. And all of us have ways that we lead kids and manage the things that go on in the classroom. So for me, differentiation is about making all of those things as closely aligned with what we know about best practice as possible. John Hattie, who is, I think, the preeminent researcher of the last 20 years in schools, and who has been a massive help to me over the years in understanding what we know from research about the general principles of teaching and learning that lead to the best achievement results. And what's been interesting to me is, since he wrote his first, shared his first massive set of research findings about 11 or 12 years ago now, he actually has been listening to and studying differentiation and feels very strongly that it's an imperative in good work in a classroom. So this is a piece a paragraph that he wrote in he's an Australian researcher, by the way, but researches stuff worldwide. This is something he wrote in a shorter piece last year. He said, many of the methods commonly associated with differentiation are in fact very similar to just really excellent teaching. And my premise is excellent teaching needs to be happening. We need to differentiate based on that, not other stuff. Many of methods commonly affixed to differentiation are indeed very similar to excellent teaching. The importance of having an invitational learning environment. The importance of having curriculum designed to help students make sense and meaning of the world around them. Providing clear and unambiguous learning intentions. Continually checking for student understanding. Planning instruction around the patterns that we see when we check for student understanding. Creating classrooms that balance stability and flexibility. He's saying all those things are characteristics of excellent teaching, and they're things advocated by differentiation. And then he says something that was in that complex definition that I just showed you. Differentiation is about building learning conditions and pedagogy which benefit all students. And that doesn't mean he's saying, let's find one thing and do that for all students, but he's saying, create the kind of environment that's going to be a good fit for many students, a better fit than most of their environments in school have been. But keep an eye on individuals and see who this is working for and who needs something a little different. So here's my pitch for you for a few minutes before we quit, before we do some questions. I want to challenge you to think about 3-dimensional differentiation. The whole notion to me of 3-dimensional differentiation is trying to make sense of this idea of differentiation in a way that helps us see its multifacetedness better. And so in doing that, it occurs to me that we have 3 lenses that we can see differentiation through. One of those is what I think of as foreground differentiation. One is background differentiation, and one is underground differentiation. So here's what I mean by those. Foreground differentiation is what you would see if you went into a colleague's classroom and you said, yes, she is differentiating there. I see it. I see what she's doing. It's what we think of as differentiation. Things like having a conversation with your students about how we can create a classroom that's going to work best for everybody. Having conversation with students about knowing what your next step in this assignment is and taking your own next step in this next time that we're going to be working. We have a time for you to work on the things you need to work on. Your job is to take your own next step. What is that? It is having, for example, a paragraph frame that I might give 3 students in a social studies class in middle school, because either reading is very difficult for them or language is difficult for them. But if I give them that paragraph frame, they're going to probably be able to write a response that's going to make pretty good sense for them. Whereas if I just said write the paragraph, they're going to be snookered. It would be that would be foreground stuff. If I say to kids, okay, guys, we're going to do a summative check on Friday. It occurs to me that you might show me what you know by making a comparison between this stuff we've been talking about and soccer. You might like doing the summative piece by writing a series of storyboards that show the unfolding of the thinking that we've been doing. Or you might enjoy doing this. But if you have a fourth way, that's fine. Just come talk to me about it and we'll work on it. But guys, don't forget, no matter which way you choose to show what you know, you have to show us that you know have the essential knowledge, the essential understandings, and the essential skills. Doing it one way versus the other doesn't free you from that. Your question is, which of these ways will help you do this best? Those are things that I would think of as differentiation. If I came into your classroom and I saw you doing those things, there are lots of other things, many, many other things. So foreground differentiation is what we think of as differentiation. I may be thinking of it more broadly than you do right now, but still it's what we're looking for. Background differentiation is 1,000 things that you and I do in the classroom that are foundational to student success, foundational to good teaching, but they don't really look like differentiation. And yet, differentiation rides on the back of background differentiation. So eventually, when I got better at doing this, I could say to my students, this is kind of a big one, but I could say to them, guys, I'm going to have to be out of class tomorrow during your class period. And I have 2 choices of what I can leave for you as a lesson plan. I can tell the teacher that's coming in to work with you that you know the classroom routines, you understand how it works, that if she will just introduce herself and remind you that you know what to do and she has a sense of that and you need to do it, or I can give you some worksheets to work with while I'm gone so that you don't have to exercise that self-control and leadership. I never had a class that said, oh, please give us the worksheets. They all said, we can do this. We know what we're doing. And they did. They knew how to get materials. They knew how to read a chart or a piece of instructions in a folder so that they knew what to do. They knew where to sit in the classroom and with whom, depending on what they were doing. They knew how to get help if they needed help. They knew how to get somebody to interpret the instructions for them if they needed that. They knew when it was okay to get up and walk around the room and when it wasn't. And they were fully capable of making that class run for me in a highly differentiated way if I wasn't in the room. And the kids greatly preferred that. Some of the work they did would be differentiated, but all that other stuff, getting the materials, not disturbing one another, getting help, watching your time, all those things, putting things back where they belong is background stuff that we had worked out, and that made what we were doing possible. Background stuff is realizing I don't have students who really have very good habits of mind for what it means to be a learner. And so I'm going to work with them on several of those habits of mind. Persistence, for example. If you don't persist, you're not very likely to improve. Shooting for excellence. If you don't really believe you can be excellent, or if you don't know what excellence looks like, you're not going to try that. So I'm going to teach them those things. That's a background thing. One teacher that I watched who really surprised me said to the kids one day when they were leaving, I was observing her class for part of my dissertation, and the kids were getting ready to leave class. This was in about January, midway through our year. She said, when you leave the class today, folks, will you please rearrange the room so that it's in a seminar format? When the bell rang, all 40 of those kids got up. Every one of them in the class moved a piece of furniture into another part of the room in a different configuration without any noise. Every one of them picked up all their stuff and left the room. And when the next group came in, everything was totally set, ready for him to go, and she hadn't moved a piece of furniture. And I sat there thinking, you have moved furniture yourself for 20 years when it needed to be moved. What is wrong with you? That's a background kind of thing. So background is what it takes to make a classroom really work smoothly, what it takes to make differentiation possible. And underground differentiation is you. It's who you are. It's the beliefs that you are trying to grow into in the classroom. It's your sense of humor. It's the tone of voice you use with the kids. It's how you handle some misbehavior for a student, mild misbehavior versus moderate misbehavior versus woohoo misbehavior. How are you going to handle those three things so that they are redemptive and the least interruptional possible? It's what you do to make that classroom work. So what I want to do for a few minutes here, because let's see, we're 7:30. Yeah, I'm supposed to have 10 minutes left. I want to show you some examples here now of what I'm talking about. We tend to forget these two things, the background and underground. We'll do so much better if we remember those all the time. And what you're telling me, and you would be totally normal on this, is that you probably need to rethink even what you're looking for in the foreground. So make sure your it in the foreground is growing, and make sure that it's not wooden. Again, it's easy for me to say this because schools and systems of schools are so complicated. I don't want to tell you that your differentiation has to look exactly like the person's next door, because I'm not doing anything to differentiate for you then. You're a human being with talents and strengths and inclinations and moods that have to be maintained and that kind of stuff. I don't want it to be wooden so that your differentiation has to be like everybody else's. Anyway, let me get off this pulpit preaching that I'm doing, and I want to show you some examples, a couple in each of these areas. Foreground differentiation, remember, is anything that we do, our conversations with kids, our instructional approaches, our room arrangements, the schedules within the classrooms, that an informed educator would recognize as differentiation when they saw it. It's visible differentiation that fits within the it, if we have the it understood well. So maybe a part of your opportunity is to really help teachers, leaders understand that even the way you fixed a room today has a lot to do with differentiation. Or that the fact that students, when they go to a table to do some work, need to have a set of instructions, and they may not all have the same instructions, but at every table, there's going to be a reader. I don't care what grade this is. There's going to be a reader who reads the instructions at that table to the student sitting at that table. which means that every kid has had a chance to really understand what they might not have understood if they'd had to read it themselves. And if the student who's the reader is not finding it clear, that'd be a good time for that reader to come to the teacher and say, could you come over here for a minute? We think we don't understand something. So here's some questions to consider. And these are a limited set, but to me, these are things that would sound like differentiation. Do you talk with your kids at the beginning of the year about what it would take to make a classroom really work for everybody? And sustain that conversation a little bit every day for a while until together you're figuring out what you might do differently and how it might look and what kids' jobs are and what my jobs are and how we're going to check in to see if it's working. That looks and sounds like differentiation to me. That's foreground stuff, and it needs to continue through the year. Do you consistently make your students your partners in creating that classroom where there's flexibility of time and space and materials and support, where individuals and small groups work together sometimes, where the teacher works with the whole class, where sometimes students work with 3 different partners in one class period, and help the kids understand that you can't make all that happen, that you have to do it together. Do your students work effectively in groups when they're working together? Are they encouraged by the work? Are they feeling discouraged for some reason? Do they know how to give each other good help rather than help that's not useful? Do they all contribute to the success of the groups? And if not, we're not finished teaching those skills yet. And those are things we have to keep on with too. Do you use a range of instructional materials, a range of strategies? Do you present in different ways? Do you have different kinds of scaffolding that you can offer students when it's time for them to take their own next steps in learning? And do you regularly move among students, observing what they're doing, asking them questions, providing individual feedback as they work? That's huge. For you to look at my piece of paper and say, explain to me how you got here. And then saying, okay, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think about the answer to my question. I'm going to come back in a minute and let you answer it for me. Why did you do this to get to this point? Because the student just told me that that's how they got there. And what else might you have done that would have gotten you to a better outcome? Go around, talk to 4 or 5 more students, go back and see where that student is. But the fact that I looked at what that kid did and asked a question is way more powerful than feeling like I have to have a different worksheet for everybody every day. Anyway, so here are a couple of foreground differentiation things. If you came into my classroom and I said to kids, we are getting ready to do X, would you rather work alone today or with a partner? I want you to think about that. What would be the benefits of working alone? And what would be the benefits of working with a partner? And how might working alone not work so well for you? And how might the partnership not work so well? Think about that for just a second. And now I'm going to tell you that if you want to work alone, I want you to come to this part of the room and find a seat when I say go. And if you want to work with a partner, I want you to find the partner that you want to work with. But remember that everybody has to have a partner. So, and working with your best friend is not always the way to go. I want you to find a partner and find a seat within the next 30 seconds in this part of the room. But that choice is a kind of differentiation. And you didn't have to make a worksheet for it.
So, Carol, would it be right to say that differentiation is agency what we use in IB?
Say it again, the differentiation's what?
Is it right to say that differentiation is practicing agency?
Well, yes, I think if whatever, that's an interesting point, probably, because if we don't teach kids to have agency, then what we're doing with them is no good. You know, they don't know how to think. They don't know when to take a step. They don't know how to adjust. They don't have the confidence to move forward. That's a huge background thing. So if I see that kids really don't know how to use the feedback I'm giving them,
Hmm.
we need to work on that a lot. And it may be that some kids know exactly how to use the feedback and others don't. So I don't need to necessarily work with the whole class, in which case that becomes differentiation. But a background thing that we ought to always be working on is that. And yes, choice and voice do help build agency.
Thank you, Carol.
So I might say, do you want to summarize the experiment we just looked at in science in a storyboard or in a paragraph? No matter which you choose, you have to do these things, show these things, but either way works. We're having a performance assessment, as you know, next Monday. And you are aware, because we've been working with them, that these are the success criteria for that performance assessment. But I have a question for you. Would you like to add a personal criterion to this list because it's something you think is important? It's something you're good at. It's something that will embellish, enhance what you're doing. Or would you rather just stick with the class criteria? If you want to do a personal criterion, then here's when to do this, here's how to do it, here's how to give it to me. Are you ready to work with your essay draft today in class? Or are you ready to get feedback on it? Because you are not ready necessarily all to take the same next step. So here's how we're going to handle it if you are going to keep working with your draft. Here's how we'll handle it if you need feedback. And this last one I like. This is a music teacher, an orchestra teacher. And he asked the kids about every 3 or 4 weeks to create a rehearsal video for him, show him 15 minutes of practice at home on their instrument, what that looks like. How would they practice for 15 minutes? And so his question here is not about the rehearsal video. They know how to do that. But he asked them if they would rather turn it in on this Friday or next Monday. And of course, any normal kid's going to say, "I'll do it on Monday. I don't want to do that today. Give me the weekend. I don't want to do anything without the weekend." But what he would say to them is, don't let your lesser inclinations make you make the wrong choice. If your grandmother's coming to visit over the weekend, if you have a soccer match over the weekend, if you have 2 more tests on Monday, the weekend is not a good idea for you. And getting it done by Friday might make your work much better quality. That's a way, too, of doing agency, Pabali, and doing the and helping kids have that sense of self. This is foreground differentiation for me. I love this idea. Again, this is foreground stuff. Teacher who has developed the habit of whatever the kids are working on, following their work, looking at their work, and also knowing in her head, here are some things that are really important for kids to do with this unit, this task, just general understanding. And here's some places they get hung up. Kids often don't understand this, or they don't know how to proceed here. So what she does is, beginning at maybe a week into whatever this is, she's going to create a list of seminars, and she likes calling them seminars, and it makes the kids feel so sophisticated. She's going to create a list of seminars that students might decide to attend over a 4 or 5 day period. And to do that, she's going to take some 4x6 sticky notes and put them on a big sheet of white poster paper or chart paper at the front of the room. And each one of those 4 sticky notes is going to have a topic for a seminar at the top of it. So the big white paper is just something to put the seminars on. And she puts the seminars on the sticky notes. This is one title, this is one title, this is one title. The seminar topics will align almost all the time with essential skills or essential understandings designated for that unit. She asked the students to read the seminar topics and to sign up for any of them under the on the white paper under the sticky note for any seminar they think will help them grow in the work that they're doing. The seminar you choose is one that you could use some strengthening in. You're close to getting it, or you're just unclear. Come to this seminar and get the help that you need to be able to move forward. Based on her work with the kids and walking around the room, talking with them, looking at their work, if she thinks they need to come to a seminar, this kid and this kid and this kid really need some help in this area, sometime in the class privately, she'll say, I want to invite you to a seminar that I think might be really helpful to you. She encourages them to come. She does not require them to come. If a student signs up for a seminar that's too easy, she already knows the student knows how to do this work. She allows the student to come, but she has the group individually and then as a group evaluate the suitability of that seminar for them. Did this help you grow? What is it you're going to do now that you're going to be better with because you came to this seminar? And those conversations obviously help a kid say, well, I don't believe I can tell her anything I'm better at because I already knew how to do this, and she knows I did. She says she finds that the seminars build agency, trust, and proficiency. We're big on that proficiency thing. I want this kid to know how to do this thing. But what this is building trust with the teacher. She sees me. She's trying to help me do this, the right thing. And she trusted me to make a decision, and I didn't make a wise one. Maybe I should do better next time. It builds agency because she's having the kids make those decisions. So I'm going to try now to do one or two of these other things just so you can get some sort of sense of them. Background differentiation, again, doesn't appear to be differentiation, but it provides the systems and the routines and the practices that make learning better for every student and that enable effective, empowering differentiation to occur. It's stuff like that teacher who got the kids to move all the furniture. She could teach the same stuff to 3 classes in very different formats depending on their needs because that furniture got moved so efficiently. I'm going to just put these questions up, let you read them as I go through.
I'll read it. Does your classroom environment feel invitational the great majority of the time to each learner in your care?
When kids come into your class, could they say to you, I look forward to coming in here. I feel known. I feel appreciated. I really feel challenged too much sometimes, but I always feel supported. It's not always easy here, but I do feel like this is important and like I'm an important part of the group. Is your curriculum energizing and motivating to every learner most of the time? We can teach the same stuff in 100 different ways. And some of those bore the living bejeebers out of kids. And some of them sound like, wow, that's interesting. I never knew that. Wow, I get this. This is kind of like something I do. Is the curriculum connected to their experiences and their customs and their interests and their aspirations? Does it feel purposeful to the kids other than trying to get a test score? Is it authentic? Does it mirror stuff that real adults do in the world? And does it call on kids to reason and understand and make meaning most of the time instead of mostly just giving back information? The nature of the curriculum that we use, how we present it, not the stuff itself, but how we present it, is massively motivating or demotivating to kids. How about assessment? Is there any chance our kids find it discouraging or threatening or confusing? Or could they somehow find it motivating and affirming and clarifying? Is our instruction, when kids are they learning actively, collaboratively? Is what we're asking them to do thought-provoking and joyful a lot of the times? But you can't get joy all the time. It needs to be there a lot of the time, but at least satisfying when they've gotten it finished. That's kind of neat. I'm proud of myself. And our students in your classroom, your partners in creating a classroom that works for everybody. So let me try just a couple of background things. This is Mr. Carter's first grade classroom. And from the beginning of school, his kids are sitting on these rugs several times a day, doing something. You see the little girl in the top left corner chose to sit by herself and work. The two little boys decided to work together. You have those choices, but they mix the groups and they mix who's sitting on the floor and who's sitting at their desk to do things. And the kids from the very first week of school know how to work together to get things done and how to support one another. And they talk about what worked for them and what didn't in that process. This is building a community of learners. Had a cool thing happen this past summer. One of my seventh and eighth graders, I frequently taught the same kids for 2 years or 3, at least some of them, emailed me and said, some of us were talking the other day. And by the way, these former eighth graders are now in their 50s, have college-age children or sometimes grandchildren. Some of us were talking the other day, and we talked about how many ways your class helped us grow. And we just decided we'd like to take you to lunch this summer one time, if you would let us do that. That is the very coolest thing on the planet, by the way. And when we got there, we did small talk and they told me about their kids and they asked what I'd been doing. But at some point, one of them said, we want to say some things to you about why your class mattered to us. And one of the things that one of them said was, you taught us to be partners to each other. You taught us that when there was a hard task, hard problem, we could solve it better together. And we spent so many hours on the telephone with each other. We spent so many weekends in each other's basements working on stuff. And after that, we very seldom tried to go it alone in school. What's happening in Mr. Carter's first grade here is
social skills.
Wonderful background stuff. It's the agency stuff again, Pavali, and it's the agency stuff and a sense of independence and a sense of not being alone when learning's hard. Kids that are slightly older, sharing with each other what they're planning to do as a next step, do it all the time. Not the same kid talking to the same kid too often. These kids working on something that has lots of parts and is hard, and some of them don't even speak English. They're working together to get it worked out. Big deal. Background. It doesn't look like differentiation. They may or may not be doing different work, but it's really, really helpful in getting the work done. I want to share this one with you. Probably, what do you want me to do about the fact that I'm running overtime here?
That's perfectly fine, Carol. Please continue.
Okay, well, I'm going to do 1 or 2 more of these and then I'll leave you. This is a teacher who was working in a class where a lot of her students did not see themselves as good learners. And a lot of her students had every confidence that they were A students. And that was happening because the school in a high school was doing detracking. They were getting rid of the smart kid class and the average class and the struggling kid class. And they were beginning to blend them together. They did it stepwise. They did it over a period of time. But for this teacher, it's the first time that she has had a split class where many of the kids in her class are used to the honor roll and honor society, going to any college they want to. And some of them feel embarrassed because they don't even think they belong in there and they don't know how to do anything and they're no good. So early in the year, she did lots of things to break down that sense of stuff. But one I saw her do, which was truly cool. She said, okay, I want to tell you what one of the things that I think is my job in this class. Doesn't mean it's not your job too sometimes, but it is my job to go home at night and create questions that we can discuss to help us understand this content better, to understand why it matters, to understand what we can do with it. So I want you to know that I'm going to go home every night and work to develop some questions that will really stretch our thinking. Here's your job, and that is to go home at night and to look at the materials that I ask you to look at, do what you need to do with them, so that you're ready to respond to those questions that I ask the next day when you come in. So we're going to have all kinds of class discussions. We're going to do it with different furniture arrangements, some of you sitting, some of you standing, all sorts of things. But here's one thing I'm going to do sometimes. I'm going to do calling on you in 3 ways, and let's call it, I'll label it three-way answering, 3-way responses. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the bag of names. And this is a paper bag that has the class period that you're in, or if it's just if it's an elementary class and it's the same kids, then it's just the same bag all the time. If it's middle or high school and you're in period 2 or period 5, then it would have a 2 or a 5 on the front. And I'm going to ask a question and pause for a minute for you to think about it. And then I'm going to repeat it. And then I'm going to pick a name out of that bag. And I'm going to ask that person to answer the question. And when she did that, the day that I saw her do this the first time, she had, among other kids who were strugglers, she had 5 boys from Somalia. And she was teaching in the New England states where it's freezing cold a lot. And the boys came from Somalia where it's as hot as India is supposed to be. And everything in that culture, everything in the community was so different for those Somali kids. Most of the kids in their class had white skin or light brown skin, and those kids were just totally black skin. Their clothing was different. They had gone through many tragedies to get there, walked hundreds of miles, sometimes stayed in all sorts of encampments. And she actually, by accident, picked that Somali boy's name out of the bag. Now, I'll tell you that if I had done that and I had gotten one of those boys' names, I would have looked at that strip and called somebody else's name. Nobody would have ever known what was on that, and I think that would have been fine. But she just pulled it out of the bag and she called his name and she said, I'm going to repeat the question, give you a minute to think. How would you answer this question? And he really looked at her like deer in a headlight. I have no clue what you're talking about. And she said, give me a name, a word or a phrase that has something to do with that question. And he could, because she'd said the question 3 times by that point. And when he did that, and this is important, she said, thank you. Not with huge enthusiasm, not with any judgment, just thank you. Then she repeated the question. She took out another name from the
Fairly good.
bag.
उसके बाद do the
And she
positive
said,
reviews seem original
I want
और
you
feedback
to,
ones. इसने अपनी कहानी बताई, छोड़ उसको भी.
Sorry, Carol. I accidentally put you on mute. I was trying to mute somebody else. I'm sorry. Carol, can you unmute yourself, please? I'm so sorry.
okay, how'd that happen?
I was trying to
when
mute
she-
somebody else.
Yeah, when she called on the second student, she repeated the question. And this was a student who had some information to share, but here's what she said. I want you to repeat what your colleague just said and build on it. And when that student finished, she said, thank you. No less enthusiastic, no more enthusiastic, just thank you. Third student, I want you to repeat what your colleague just said and build on it. And when she was doing that, they were always building on one another's responses. They had to listen, they had to find what was worthwhile in that, and then they had to make it better. That was really powerful. Then she would switch after a while to what she called volunteers. And she said, okay, now for a couple of questions, you can volunteer to answer some if you want to, you don't have to. And of course, the kids that know a lot of this stuff and love it really want to volunteer if they're kids that like to speak out in class. So that was lively. And then she said, okay, now we're going to switch to our third way of responding, and that is new voices. And she said, one of my strong beliefs is we are much better as human beings and as learners if we hear from everybody in our group, if we hear a variety of perspectives, a variety of voices. So if we did not hear your voice in Bag of Names or in volunteers, I'd like to hear it in new voices. And I thought to myself, they're not going to do that. If they didn't get nailed the first time and they wanted to volunteer and they did, they're not going to speak up. But she was so compelling that it mattered that they really did. Lots of good things happened in there, but this is, again, for me, a background thing. At the end of the year, she always, at key points in the year, asked the kids to give her feedback on various aspects of what was going on, and did that at the end of the year. My teaching assistant actually was working on her dissertation in this school, and she, this was before everybody had cell phones. She emailed me in the middle of the day. She actually called me on the phone. And she said, I have to tell you this. And her voice was kind of breaking. I just have to tell you this. I just have to say it to somebody. She had been looking at those year-end evaluations, and time after time, kids had said, at the beginning of the year, we thought only some of the kids in our class were smart. We have come to understand that everybody has something to contribute, and that all of us are smarter if we can hear from more people, have more perspectives in our world. That wasn't even a prompt. It's what the kids had taken away from this. That's hugely powerful. It has everything to do with differentiation, motivation, and the willingness of kids to take a chance. I need to switch to this third thing. You've got a handout that probably posted for you, so you can look at these.
Thank you for that.
So here's a few things with underground differentiation. It's the beliefs, principles, attitudes, actions that you bring into that class. It's the way you are and the way you think in that room. And this is highly likely to be the most important element in student success in your classroom. And so if you're missing, if your leaders are telling you that it's all about instructional strategy, but nobody's thinking about the quality of the background, and nobody's seeing what it means to develop you more and more fully as a leader, then you've got some malfunction. So again, there's some questions here, but I want to just show you a couple of examples. I was working with a colleague of mine a couple of years ago during the pandemic with some schools in Brooklyn, New York, one of the boroughs in New York City. Lots of poverty, lots of angry kids, lots of kids that are discouraged with the world. And my colleague, Christy, was going to New York and working with teachers in 3 schools on trying to make the foreground, background, and underground differentiation function, helping them to expand their understanding of differentiation. And one of the things they worked on a lot was the nature of the environment. What does it look like if you have an environment that's really nurturing student success? What does it look like if you have a classroom that kids are eager to come to and feel supported and trusted? And so she would work in one of the schools and they would practice some things and she'd come in and give them feedback. And then maybe 2 or 3 sessions later, she would invite one of the groups from another school to come to the first school and just observe their classes and see what they saw, which was hugely powerful. This one group, I want you to think about this. These are high school teachers teaching kids who don't believe in themselves, don't believe in their communities, frequently don't believe in a future for themselves. They just have really tough lives with high mountains to climb. And the visitors came into the class they were visiting, and they made some notes, observing. You could see them thinking and jotting down things. And when they left, nobody asked them to do this. The leader left the classroom with her colleagues, and came back in a couple of minutes and left a piece of paper on the teacher's desk. And the teacher didn't see it until the class period ended, or the day, I don't know which one. But what the note said was, when we entered the door, we felt like the whole room gave us a giant hug. That is so powerful, especially in that context. And what that What had happened was a teacher who sees the value of human beings have realized that while she's trying to teach them stuff, she needs to teach them respect, and she needs them to learn to trust one another and to solve problems together and to speak with one another civilly even when they're angry with something. And because those kids know each other now and they work together harmoniously and they're doing things that the teachers from the visiting school would never have imagined in their classroom. This was what one of the teachers said to the group when they left the room. When I walked in there, I felt like that whole room gave us a hug. And the other teachers agreed. That's something that was teacher initiated. And I can't tell you how important that is in student success. Here's a high school teacher in Chicago, has 5 classes a day. All the classes are too big. The kids will tell you that he cares about them, that he knows them. I had another teacher yesterday whose classes are much, much smaller, high school teacher, tell me there's no way in the world he can know his kids. There's just no way, and there's no point in his trying. There's just too many of them. This guy does many things to know his kids, including for me, that door thing helped me know him way more than many other things would have. When he gives the kids something they need to turn in on a piece of notebook paper, in addition to their name and class period and date, he has a prompt on the board. And he asks them to write that prompt on the top of the sheet of paper they're going to work in and answer it. So what's the best movie you've seen recently? What's your best school memory from last week? What's your favorite pizza? What teams do you root for? This next one was a real popular one. Oh, no, I'm sorry. What's the most important characteristic of a friend? That isn't the one that, I mean, they liked all of these. They feel like he wants to know them. He cares. And then he'll comment to them individually about some of these things or use one as an illustration in class. This one's the one that they loved. Can you recommend a book I can read to my 6-year-old son? They came with their favorite books, loaned the kid the books, went running into class to see if he had read the book to them yet. And I think this one is beautifully courageous. What would you rather be doing than being in my class today? This is a teacher who cares to know kids and says, I teach too many of them, but I'm not going to give up on that because I need to know them as human beings to teach them well.
Very interesting.
This is from my own personal history. My first year as a teacher, I was so totally lame. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, and I was teaching in a really difficult setting. I will tell you that those kids did not eat me alive. And that was a miracle. It truly was a flat out miracle. The reason was they could tell that I liked them. I got my first job at the end of October, which is end of the first marking period in the US. When the assistant principal in this new school that I was starting to teach in at the end of the first marking period took me down a hall, knocked on a door, high school, juniors. A guy that came to the door who looked really elderly to me, definitely not nearly as old as I am now, but I thought he was an old guy. And the assistant principal said to him, Mr. Melton, this is your replacement, you're fired. That was my first moment of teaching. It is not a good first moment of teaching. And things had not gone well with him, to say the least. I didn't know what I was doing, but I found it fascinating to be able to try to figure out how to make stuff okay for kids. My teacher colleague next door was finishing her last year of teaching as I was beginning my first one. She was next door to me. It was not hard for her to figure out that I was in varying degrees of trouble most days. And many times in the afternoon, she'd come in my room and sort of walk around and chat for a minute. Sometimes she'd tell me a funny story. Sometimes she'd comment on something a kid had done in the classroom. But frequently, she was saying something that I knew was important to remember. I just didn't know what it meant. And one day she said to me, you know, I think I've had a good day when every student goes home with a personal Ms. Gardner story to tell. And I thought, 35 kids, 5 classes, and I'm supposed to end up with a personal Ms. Tomilson story for them every day? I can't do that. Eventually, what I found out was, one thing is that if I tell a good story to the whole class, that's a personal thing for everybody. That's different. They remember it. It's funny. It's touching. It reminds them of them or their little brother, or that makes their lives sound better all of a sudden because mine was so bad. And that's what I learned to do, to tell a personal Ms. Tomlinson story every day, but not 125 of them, one or two in a class or, you know, in a small group or whatever. But eventually, what I also understood many, many years later was that I also know when I go home, I've had a good day when I have a story that a student told me to reflect on. That's a teacher thing that makes a difference in a classroom. We need to be building joy in a classroom so that every learner experiences learning as great joy, as a human gift, that every learner finds deep satisfaction in learning, that everybody sees themselves as a learner and wants to keep on learning. I love this comment from a teacher. He says, a kid said something funny in class today, and the entire room, myself included, burst out laughing, and we couldn't stop for several very long, joyous minutes. I was in tears. You ever laugh so hard you're in tears in a classroom? That's the wonderful thing. And this punchline is powerful. That laughter will not show up in any data sheet, but it matters too. That's part of an invitational classroom. Those are teacher things.
True.
So here's my swan song to you. This comes from another teacher. She says, the longer I teach, the more I realize I have not figured it out yet. This, my friends, is not a bad thing. It's wonderful that we have to keep learning every day, or teaching would be deadly. So if you have found a few things to work on here, go for it. Okay, now we're already way over time here. So how do you want to handle this, Pavali? Do you have one question you'd like for me to answer in the chat
I'll
box, or
just
from you, or
most of
what?
the questions, Carol, you answered during the session, and yeah, thank you. I must say thank you for actually puncturing our myths of differentiation and bringing us back to that human ground, that what is actually required. So yes, I have I'm not even sure now if these questions make sense, since it's a new light we all are under. Uh, what advice you have during curriculum review or developing the curriculum so that the learners needs are addressed for the leadership of the in the school, and when we do the curriculum review, what do you
Yeah,
suggest?
yeah. Well, probably the best concrete representation of the principles of high quality curriculum are found in Understanding by Design, which is very complex, but right on. I'm going to go back here now for a minute, and I'm going to show you an example. Uh-oh. I'm going to try to do this super quickly. I was in a middle school class a long time ago now, where teachers were trying to learn to differentiate instruction. And this particular teacher found it hard to think about changing anything in her class. She felt pressure to do it, so she was doing some of it, but it just didn't
Honestly,
click.
she's not alone, Carol. All of us
I'm
are in
sorry?
this. I said she's not alone. All
Oh,
of us
no,
are
of
in the
course
same
not.
boat.
No, her tribe is very large. Yeah. So she was teaching a unit on Greek and Roman mythology,
Hmm.
which is typical in Western schools, I guess. And what they did in this unit was they kept reading myths from Greece and myths from Rome. Every kid had to have a notebook in which they summarized the plot of every myth. Every one of them had to take notes on the characters. And for some reason, she asked them to draw symbols that represented the characters in their notebook. When she gave them tests, it was all true false matching and fill in the blank, which myth in the Greek tradition matches the one in Rome. But the one thing that she decided to, so for example, she might ask them to match the Greek character with the Roman one as one. The one thing that she worked on to differentiate, and she worked on it hard, she really did, and she was proud of it. The kids had to do a final product as part of their summative assessment. And what she asked them to do was to choose one of, now you think about this and what you're telling me about the different lesson plan thing. She created 25 different choices of things kids could do for that product. And kids could pick any one of the 25. And what they had to do was put their response in their mythology notebook. So that means you can't really draw anything big, or you couldn't do a video, or anything like that. It has to be in that notebook. But still, her instructions to get it right was to proofread your work and use citations where you needed to. That was really about it. The product that most of the kids chose was choice number 1. And that was to do a chart where you had to list at least 10 characters from Roman myths in one column, their counterparts in Greek myths in another column, summarize the myths for both of the characters, and draw a symbol that represented both characters. A very large percentage of the kids did this because it seemed easy. It's exactly what they had done in class, and they could copy most of the stuff out of their notebooks. They did it on big posters so she could post them. She had some posted in the classroom. She had some posted in the hallway. She changed them every few days so you could see other people's work. And I never did see a single one that was absolutely correct. The kid would think the Greek character was Roman and the Roman character was Greek, or they'd get the myths backwards, or they didn't understand what the myth was about. And that symbol thing was crazy. It never occurred to her to show them, for example, why Poseidon was carrying this pitchfork thing, and so that was really wacky. There was another one where the kids could plan a travel itinerary for a character in one of the myths, choose the places the character might want to go, and outline what the character would do at each site, including transportation and meals. And I just happened to overhear one day when a little guy came in and said to her, that planning a travel itinerary for the characters, I kind of think that's interesting, but maybe I'm not understanding. Did these people travel a lot? Did they have public transportation? Did they have restaurants? Could they go to McDonald's or 7-Eleven to get food? I mean, he sort of knew something was wrong with that it made no sense, but he went ahead and did it, and it was kind of creative. It didn't have anything to do with anything. So I'm going to suggest to you now that the next year, if she becomes a true believer in some of these things, she's going to be aiming for some of these things, probably engagement of her kids, not filling out a chart, truly understanding what this stuff's about, real clarity of goals, because there's no goal clarity in that other stuff that she just did. Teaching, believing that all your kids can do important things and scaffolding that success, and the goal of remembering this stuff and being able to use it in some place. So this time, I'm missing something here. Okay, wrong slide. This time, she's going to teach the myths around the concepts of fear, fate, ethics, mortality and immortality, love, power, and heroism. Every 7th grader knows these things. They guide their lives. She's having them think about these understandings and see if they ever apply to anything and which other understandings they think do apply. People fear the unknown. 8th graders do, and so did these people in the myths. People attempt to explain the unknown in ways that make it knowable. We do that too. Humans seek to understand, explain, and or control fate. We do that all the time. So did they. Exploration of mortality and immortality gives rise to faith, religion, practice. Understanding love helps us understand our humanity. Power can be used for good or ill. Stories of heroes help people clarify their ethics and beliefs. How's that compared to make your chart and put the name of the people we're talking about and summarize the myth and move on? The stuff on the left are the traits of powerful curriculum.
Lovely.
And in the end, this was her product instead of the do one of 25 things. Create a visual presentation, which could be 1,000 different things, that shows those concepts and principles as they appeared in the Greek and Roman myths, and how those same things appear in our common myth movies like Star Wars, Black Panther, Incredible Hulk, Wonder Woman, and so forth. Kids love that. And identifying these things, which are sort of myth stories from our world, they're the kids' world, with the Greek and Roman gods, was a home run. Second choice they had was make a case in writing, acting, podcasting, role-playing, poetry, or some other format you suggest, that the principles that help us understand Greek and Roman myths are still relevant in our world today. Illustrate and explain in some ways in which our responses to those realities can be like those of the Greek and Roman heroes and villains that shared up in the myths there. Two choices, both dealing with this stuff. Really fascinating with the kids. Same curriculum. What we're after is this kind of stuff. This is what makes it fly. So that's an answer to your question. I mean, all of these have long answers, but you can kind of ask yourself. I saw a principal that was really good at doing this. Her teachers respected her and liked her, and she'd come in and sit down sometimes and just watch a whole class and take notes on just the kids, not even what was going on, but just the kids. And one day, and the teachers were working on differentiation, and they were working really with some concept-based stuff, which is sort of what this is. But when the class was over, the principal, who had really been thinking hard, said to the teacher, "Can you help me understand why any normal fourth grader would have wanted to do that exercise you just asked them to do?" And she didn't feel offended. She stopped for a minute and she said, watching them, I don't think they did want to do it. The trick here is that she's having the kids do things that are powerful to them to learn stuff that otherwise would have just been trivial. So that's a short answer for a complex thing. Go ahead. You want to try one more question?
I think most of our questions are answered. So, yeah. In case
I'm
I
sorry?
find any, I will reach you through the same portal. In case anybody has a different question, then I will definitely reach out to you. But thank you so much, Carol. We truly appreciate you being here.
I hope I haven't made you crazy. It's a lot of stuff, but just look at big pictures. Look at one example and see what you can figure out. And the stuff that's not feeling right to you, talk about it together and figure out where you can go. Thanks for your time. Thanks for being here, and I'll leave you so you can leave.
I'm sorry,
Thank
Miss
you.
Palvi.
1 second, please.
I'm sorry.
Padma
When
will address it in the community. Thank you. Yes. So on behalf of the entire Ecurious Mind community, I want to express our heartfelt gratitude for gracing us with your presence once again. Thank you, Carol.
My pleasure.
Your work has not only empowered us as educators, as I said, it has punctured our what we used to call differentiation to a new differentiation, which is actually differentiation, which is what I could make sense out of it was transdisciplinary in nature, agentic, making connections to yourself, being more human, and the transfer and application of learning, what we can see in the class, if I can sum it up to that. Thank you,
And
Carol.
occasionally, probably occasionally you do need two different resources for kids to use, one that they can listen to and one they can read, or go to a website like Diffit, which is new. And its whole point is that it differentiates anything for you. And you can ask it for readings at one reading at 5 different grade levels, or you can ask it to create a reading that encompasses these things and do it at 4 different reading levels. Sometimes you need that, but it's all this other stuff that's where the power is. You don't want to put all the power in the worksheets and trying to do a whole bunch of different lesson plans. Do one really great one and figure out how to scaffold it different ways.
True. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. Carol, we have a request from one of the schools. I can speak to you personally on that once everybody leaves. Can you just stay back for a minute? One of the school leaders want to speak to you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thanks a
So
lot.
be the change to bring the change. Ecurious Minds. Be the powerful one that you are and keep spreading your fragrance. Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you for
Do
joining
enjoy
me.
the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank